Was halfway through repairing the old dock behind my lake cabin when a sound split through the quiet air like a knife through glass, a scream. Not just any scream, but the kind that freezes a man's blood and sends every nerve in his body into overdrive. It was sharp, desperate, and coming from the front yard. I didn't think. I didn't pause. My hammer clattered to the wooden planks as I bolted around the corner of the cabin, my boots pounding against the dirt and gravel. And then I saw it, a sight so infuriating that my vision tunneled and my hands curled into fists on instinct. A man in a dark security uniform stood rigidly on my front lawn, his arm outstretched, a black handgun aimed directly at my daughter's chest. He was tall, mid-40s maybe, with a shiny HOA badge clipped to his chest like he thought it made him a lawman. His face was twisted with some mix of arrogance and self-importance. The patch on his shoulder read Maple Shore HOA Security, as if those words gave him the right to point a firearm at someone on my property. And then there was Emily. She wasn't just standing there, she was frozen in that coiled, ready stance I knew all too well. Hands slightly raised, jaw clenched, eyes locked on the man with a calm intensity that could cut steel. Anyone else might have looked scared. Emily didn't. But I could tell she was seconds from acting, and if she did, this guy was going to regret his entire week, possibly his life. Step back. She's trespassing, the man barked at me without lowering the gun. His voice cracked slightly, like he was trying to sound in control but the situation was already slipping from his grasp. I stopped just far enough to keep the space between us clear, but my voice came out like gravel. You want to run that by me again? She refused to show ID. This is HOA property. We have. Stop. My tone was a blade. You're standing on my property, pointing a loaded weapon at my daughter, and claiming she's trespassing? You've got exactly 3 seconds to put that thing down before you regret every choice that brought you here. The man's eyes flicked to Emily again, probably thinking she was just some stubborn resident giving him lip. What he didn't know, and was about to find out in the most painful way, was that Emily wasn't just any visitor. She was 30 years old, a decorated federal officer, and the commander of FBI tactical units. She'd faced hostage situations, armed standoffs, and suspects far more dangerous than this HOA wannabe cop. Emily's voice cut through the tension, low but razor-sharp. Sir, I command federal tactical teams for the FBI. You have 3 seconds to lower that weapon before you make a mistake you will never come back from. The guy actually scoffed, like she was bluffing. His ego must have been driving the bus, because no sane person would still be standing there with their finger near the trigger after hearing those words. His stance wavered for half a second, but his pride kept him in place. Yeah? You got proof of that, he said, his tone mocking but his grip just a bit less steady. Emily didn't flinch. She moved slowly, deliberately, her eyes never leaving his. One hand slid inside her jacket, and for a moment, his gun arm twitched like he was considering an even dumber move. But she withdrew her hand with practiced calm and produced her FBI credentials. The gold badge caught the sunlight, gleaming like a warning siren. My gut told me the air had just shifted. His confidence cracked right there. You could see the exact moment the truth hit him, that he'd been aiming a deadly weapon at a federal agent on her own father's land. The color drained from his face. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. You're bluffing, he muttered, but it sounded more like he was trying to convince himself than us. Emily tilted her head just slightly, her voice dropping even lower. If I were bluffing, you'd still have the upper hand. You don't. For the first time, his gun wavered downward, but it wasn't enough for me. My hands itched to step in, to rip the weapon away myself, but Emily's controlled stance told me to wait. I trusted her, I'd seen her in action before. When Emily took charge of a situation, it was like watching a storm roll in, unstoppable, precise, and devastating to anything in its path. He tried to regain his footing with some lame justification. I was told this property is under HOA jurisdiction. We've had trouble with strangers. You're standing on private property that doesn't belong to your HOA, Emily interrupted, her tone slicing right through him. You didn't confirm your jurisdiction. You didn't verify identity. You didn't call law enforcement. You went straight to deadly force against an unarmed person who posed no threat. That's not protocol. That's a crime. I took a step closer, my voice matching hers in steel. And just so we're clear, I own this land outright. Your HOA has no legal claim here, not an inch. You've just committed armed trespass and brandished a weapon without cause. That's not going to end well for you. The guy's eyes darted between us, the weight of his situation pressing down like a boulder. His gun arm finally sagged fully, and I could almost hear his heartbeat from where I stood. He'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, and it was written all over his face. What he didn't know yet was that lowering his weapon wasn't going to save him. Emily had already shifted into operational mode. And when Emily took control, there was no undoing what came next. 2 days before that gun was ever pointed at Emily, I'd already had my first run-in with the Maple Shore HOA. I'd been living at the cabin for just over a month, enjoying the kind of peace you only get when your nearest neighbor is half a mile away and the loudest sound at night is the wind moving through the pine trees. Then a group of 3 people in neatly pressed polos and clipboards walked right up my driveway like they owned the place. The leader, a tall woman with bleached blonde hair and an expression that could curdle milk, introduced herself as Karen, president of the Maple Shore Homeowners Association. She gestured to her companions, who were clearly trying to look official but came off like kids playing dress-up. We're here to inform you that your property falls under our HOA's oversight, she announced, as if she were delivering royal decree. I set down my coffee, keeping my tone polite but firm. That's going to be a problem for you, because this property isn't part of your HOA. Never has been, never will be. Karen gave me a tight smile. Sir, our jurisdiction extends to all homes along the lakefront. You'll need to register as a member, pay the required dues, and comply with our rules. That includes no open fires, no unapproved exterior changes, and no boat docking without HOA authorization. It took everything I had not to laugh. I own every inch of this land outright. I checked the deed before I bought it. Your jurisdiction ends 3 properties away from here. You've got nothing to enforce on me. Her smile dropped instantly. The friendly act evaporated, and I caught the sharpness in her eyes. We'll see about that, she said, then turned on her heel and marched back to their golf cart. I should have known that wouldn't be the last I'd see of them. 2 days later, Emily arrived. She just wrapped a 6-week FBI tactical leadership training program and wanted a weekend of quiet, fishing, and a few beers by the fire. We stayed up late talking that night, swapping stories, me about the cabin life, her about some of the crazier scenarios she'd run in training. But early the next morning, I was out back on the dock doing repairs while Emily wandered out front with a cup of coffee. That's when the so-called HOA security officer rolled up in his golf cart, wearing dark tactical pants, a black shirt, and a Maple Shore HOA security patch like he was part of some elite law enforcement team. He parked right in front of my truck and got out, clipboard in hand. You a resident? He asked Emily, his tone already dripping with the kind of authority that comes from someone who's never actually had any. Emily sipped her coffee. Visiting my dad. Name? He demanded. She arched an eyebrow. Why? HOA rules. All guests have to register. Need to see ID. She gave him a short laugh. This isn't HOA property. You're wasting your time. That clearly struck a nerve, because he stepped closer, squaring his shoulders. Ma'am, refusal to comply is grounds for trespassing charges. Emily set her coffee down on the hood of my truck, her expression turning from amused to icy in an instant. You don't have jurisdiction here. Leave. Instead of doing the smart thing, he doubled down. You have 3 seconds to show me ID before I. And that's when he pulled the gun. No badge from the sheriff's department. No legal warrant. Just a self-important HOA security officer aiming a firearm at someone standing on private property that didn't belong to him or the organization he worked for. From where I was out back, I didn't see the gun get drawn, I only heard Emily's voice shift into command mode. She'd used that tone in situations where every second could decide whether someone lived or died. "Sir," she said evenly, "you're pointing a loaded weapon at a federal officer on private property. You have 3 seconds to lower it before you commit a felony that will destroy your career and your freedom." His response? A laugh. "Yeah, right. You don't scare me." Emily didn't even blink. "I'm not here to scare you. I'm here to stop you from making the biggest mistake of your life." That's when I came charging around the corner, still holding a hammer in one hand, ready to use it if I had to. The sight of him aiming a weapon at my daughter sent a rush of cold fury through my veins. I wanted to rip the gun out of his hands and throw him into the lake. But Emily's stance told me she was in control, and I knew better than to step in and mess with her tactical read of the situation. The guy tried to wave me off. "Stay back. She's trespassing." "She's my daughter," I snapped. "And she's standing on my land. You're the only trespasser here." He tried again to claim authority, mumbling something about HOA territory, but Emily cut him off cold. "Your HOA territory ends half a mile from here. I've seen your property map. You are out of bounds and out of line. And if you don't drop that weapon in the next 2 seconds, the next people you'll see are armed federal agents here to take you into custody." The man's eyes darted to her jacket pocket as she reached in and pulled out her credentials. The gold badge glinted in the morning sun like a signal flare, and I saw the exact moment it hit him, that the woman he'd been threatening wasn't just some stubborn resident, but a commanding officer in one of the most elite law enforcement units in the country. His face went pale. The gun wavered, but his pride still kept him from lowering it all the way. That's when Emily stepped forward, slow and deliberate, her eyes locked on his. In one fluid motion that was so fast I barely saw it, she twisted the gun from his hand, ejected the magazine, and handed both parts to me. "You're done," she told him, her voice calm but final. "Leave before this gets worse for you." I didn't know it yet, but for this guy, and for the entire HOA behind him, things were about to get a lot worse. The moment Emily twisted the gun from his hand, it was like watching a balloon deflate in slow motion. All the fake authority, all the puffed-up bravado in that man's posture vanished. He just stood there, breathing hard, his face pale and his hands twitching like he wasn't sure whether to shove them in his pockets or throw them up in surrender. I could see the shame starting to creep in, but mixed with something else, the stubborn pride of a man who couldn't stand being wrong, especially in front of strangers. Emily kept her eyes locked on him, her voice calm but slicing through the air like a blade. "You aimed a loaded weapon at an unarmed person without cause. That's aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. On top of that, you threatened a federal officer, interfered with her duties, and did it all on property that doesn't even fall under your HOA's jurisdiction. Do you understand what kind of charges you're looking at?" The man's mouth opened, but no sound came out at first. Finally, he stammered, I was told this place was in the HOA zone. I was following orders." Emily's eyebrow twitched upward, a small sign I recognized as her way of saying you just made it worse for yourself. She took a step closer, her voice lowering in a way that forced him to lean forward just to hear. "Orders don't protect you when you break the law. You are responsible for your actions. And pointing a gun at me? That's on you, not your boss." I chimed in, my tone like steel. "And just so we're clear, I've lived here long enough to know exactly where your HOA's boundaries end. This cabin is outside of them by a good half-mile. Which means you didn't just cross a legal line, you stomped all over it with both feet. The guy shifted from foot to foot, glancing toward his golf cart like he was trying to calculate if he could just walk away from this. But Emily wasn't about to let him off that easy. She took the empty pistol from me, locked the slide back, and held it up. "This weapon," she said, "is now evidence in an ongoing investigation. You won't be needing it again." She slipped it into an evidence bag she always seemed to have on her, a reminder that Emily was never truly off duty. I pulled my phone from my pocket and called the county sheriff. "We've got a situation out here," I said. "HOA security just pulled a gun on my daughter. She's FBI. He's now disarmed and being detained." The dispatcher didn't even need the address. Small-town law enforcement tends to know you by your voice, especially when you live in an area this quiet. "Deputy's on his way," she said, and hung up. While we waited, Emily kept the man right where he was, her body language making it clear that if he tried anything, he wouldn't get more than 2 steps before he was on the ground. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't threaten him. She just kept that steady, commanding tone that told him he'd already lost control of the situation and there was no getting it back. 10 minutes later, a sheriff's deputy rolled up in a white SUV, dust kicking up from the gravel road. Deputy Hall, a big man with a calm demeanor and the kind of voice that could talk down a charging bull, stepped out, hat in hand. "Morning," he said to me, then glanced at Emily. "Agent." Emily gave a short nod. "Deputy." Hall listened as we explained what happened, taking notes on a small pad. When Emily described the moment the gun came out, his expression hardened. "You understand," he said, turning to the HOA guard, "that this is a felony, right?" The man muttered something about, "just doing my job," but Hall cut him off. "No job gives you the right to brandish a firearm on private property without cause. You've been warned before about patrolling outside HOA limits. This time, you crossed a line that the DA's going to be very interested in." Hall cuffed him right there, the metallic click echoing in the quiet morning air. "You have the right to remain silent," he began, reading him the rest of his rights before guiding him toward the SUV. The man didn't fight. He just looked defeated, like the weight of the charges was finally sinking in. Once he was in the back seat, Hall turned to Emily. "You want to handle the federal side of this?" "Absolutely," Emily said. "I'll be filing a report citing obstruction of a federal officer, brandishing a weapon in the commission of a crime, and interference with jurisdiction." Hall nodded, clearly relieved to hand over part of the mess. "I'll get the local charges filed. This HOA's been a thorn in people's sides for a while, but this is the nail in their coffin." As Hall drove off with the guard in custody, Emily slipped her hands into her jacket pockets and looked over at me. There was that little half-smile again, the one she got when she just won a fight without even raising her voice. "Dad," she said, "how attached are you to the idea of me leaving this alone?" I raised an eyebrow. "Not at all. In fact, I was hoping you'd be the one to deal with them. Permanently." She gave a slow nod, as if she'd already been planning her next move from the second that gun came out. "Good. Because I'm not done with them. Not even close." The rest of that day, Emily worked quietly at the kitchen table, laptop open, phone pressed to her ear, fingers flying over the keyboard. I heard her talking to someone at the Bureau's legal department, pulling up property maps, requesting jurisdictional files, and reviewing past complaints against the Maple Shore HOA. Every so often, she'd mutter under her breath, "This is worse than I thought." When I asked what she meant, she leaned back in her chair and sighed. They've been operating outside their boundaries for months, maybe years. Intimidating people. Issuing fake fines. Threatening to enforce rules that don't legally apply. Today wasn't just an accident. This is their standard operating procedure. Her eyes hardened. That ends now. By sundown, she'd built a case file so thick it looked like it belonged in a courtroom. And that was exactly where she intended to take it. What Emily had in mind for the HOA would make what happened to their security officer look like a slap on the wrist. Emily didn't just file a report and walk away. That's not how she operates. When she takes aim at a problem, she dismantles it piece by piece until it can't get back up again. The morning after the arrest, she was up before sunrise, pacing the kitchen with her phone pressed to her ear, her voice low but full of controlled energy. She wasn't talking to friends, she was talking to bureau contacts, the kind of people who don't pick up unless it's serious. Every call seemed to add more fuel to the fire. By the time I'd had my second cup of coffee, Emily had already coordinated with a federal prosecutor, secured property maps from the county assessor's office, and pulled a list of every HOA board member. She even had a copy of their bylaws, which she spread across the dining table like a battle map. "They've been breaking their own rules," she said, jabbing her finger at the paper. No documented contracts for their security hires, no insurance compliance, and zero authority to patrol beyond their boundary line. This isn't just a one-off. This is systemic abuse of authority. I could see the gears turning in her head, not just to punish the man who'd pulled the gun, but to bring the entire HOA to its knees. By noon, she was dressed in her sharp, no-nonsense black suit. Her badge hung at her hip, visible but not flaunted. She slid a thick folder into her leather case, then looked at me with that small smirk that always meant she was about to make a statement. "You feel like taking a drive?" We didn't just drive. We rolled up to the Maple Shore HOA clubhouse in style, 2 black SUVs in convoy, the kind you see in movies when the feds show up. Emily had called in a small FBI tactical unit to accompany her, not for intimidation, though it worked beautifully, but because she anticipated resistance. The SUVs parked directly in front of the clubhouse doors. 6 agents stepped out, full tactical gear, earpieces in, scanning the area like they were sweeping a crime scene. Residents walking by froze, whispering to each other, phones coming out to record. Inside the clubhouse, the board was already in session. Karen, the bleach-blonde president, sat at the head of the table with her clipboard, looking smug until she saw who walked through the door. Her face drained of color like someone had pulled the plug. The murmuring stopped. The room went silent. Emily strode to the center of the room and set her case on the table. She didn't sit. She didn't need to. She opened the folder and laid out documents with crisp precision, photographs of the guard pulling his weapon, maps proving the boundaries, affidavits from witnesses, and a letterhead stamped notice from the U.S. Attorney's Office. "Good evening," she said, her voice carrying over the room. "My name is Special Agent Emily Carter, FBI Tactical Division. I am here to address a matter of federal concern regarding this association's repeated violations of the law." Karen swallowed hard, but tried to put on her president voice. "Agent Carter, there must be some misunderstanding." Emily didn't even look at her. "No misunderstanding. Your security officer committed aggravated assault on a federal officer while acting outside of any legal jurisdiction. That is a felony. He has been taken into custody and will be facing both state and federal charges." She turned her gaze to the entire board. "But he is not the only problem here. This HOA has a documented history of unlawful patrols, fraudulent fines, and intimidation tactics used on residents outside your authority. That ends today." One of the board members shifted in his seat, clearing his throat. "You can't just—" "Yes," Emily cut in sharply, "I can. And I will." She slid a set of papers toward Karen. "This is a federal cease and desist order. You will remove all unauthorized signage within 72 hours. You will cease any enforcement activities outside your mapped jurisdiction. You will dissolve all contracts with unlicensed security personnel immediately. And you will issue written apologies to every property owner you have illegally targeted in the last 2 years." The silence was heavy. Even the ticking clock on the wall seemed loud. Then Emily added, "Failure to comply will result in federal prosecution of this board under statutes for conspiracy, fraud, and harassment. That includes personal liability. Which means your homes, your savings, your pensions, all of it, will be on the table. Karen's lips trembled. We didn't mean. Emily slammed the folder shut, making the entire table jump. You meant every bit of it. You just didn't expect to get caught. The tactical agents outside shifted, visible through the clubhouse windows. That was the final straw. Karen grabbed a pen and signed the order without looking at anyone else. One by one, the rest of the board members followed. Once the last signature was on paper, Emily leaned forward slightly. Good choice. The sheriff's department will monitor your compliance. I'll be in touch to ensure every step of this order is met. If I have to come back, it won't be for a meeting, it'll be with arrest warrants. She gathered the papers, turned, and walked out without another word. The agents followed, and we left the clubhouse as silently as we'd arrived. Outside, a small crowd had gathered. People whispered, some smiling, others just staring at the SUVs pulling away. Word was already spreading. That evening, sitting on the porch of my cabin with the lake shimmering in the fading light, Emily leaned back in her chair. Dad, she said, you know the best part? I chuckled. What's that? They'll never come near this property again. And they're going to spend the next year too busy cleaning up their mess to bother anyone else. I couldn't help but grin. Remind me to stay on your good side. She smirked. Smart man. From that day forward, the Maple Shore HOA went quiet. No more golf carts creeping past the driveway. No more clipboard inspections. No more self-important demands. It was as if they'd finally realized their little kingdom had borders, and that some borders you just don't cross. And every so often, when Emily visits, she still teases me. Next time, invite someone interesting, she says with a wink. Preferably someone who doesn't point a gun at me. We laugh, but the truth is, that guard's mistake was the best thing that ever happened to my peace and quiet. Because thanks to Emily, the HOA learned a lesson they'll never forget: when you mess with the wrong person, you don't just lose, you get dismantled.